Hello and welcome to the Stockout. Hope everyone had a great Mother's Day weekend. This is your show at FreightWaves for all things related to the CPG and retail industries. I am one of your hosts, Mike Bowdendistel, joined by Grace, president of the SIP Club, Sharky. Grace, good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Hopefully you enjoyed some Mother's Day celebrations. I actually the zoo had Bring Your Mother free day, so I took my mom to the zoo and got to see the new baby lemurs, and it was a good old time. So hopefully you had some fun too.
Complete washout yesterday in Dallas. Storms, power went out. So, yeah, it wasn't really a great time to
Wow.
celebrate. Yeah. But today, what we have to talk about is we'll go through a little bit about what Britton Ladd talked about last week. It's a good enough episode. I think we should maybe just review that for a couple minutes. We talk about Panera and your trials and tribulations in the Panera Sip Club. Glad you didn't, off yourself with the charge of lemonade there. We'll talk about Gen Z and whether Gen Z is just a group of mall rats, if they're bringing that back. Some interesting quotes there. And then we'll talk about the latest with Amazon and its seller fees. We always seem to talk a lot about Amazon. It's kind of par for the course, I think, when you have one company that's 39% of the e-commerce. Uh, always seem to be making a lot of changes to their rules. If you're a seller that's selling into Amazon, you always have to be on top of these things, it seems like, which has given rise to this cottage industry of consulting firms that work on behalf of these Amazon Marketplace sellers. So we'll talk about those topics. Hopefully those are interesting to the audience. Hopefully we get some people who started following us with the show last week with Britton Ladd. And before we talk about those things, if anyone's not already signed up for the Stockout newsletter, I would invite you to do that by going to www.freightwaves.com/the Stockout. It's going to be the first one. Just go to FreightWaves newsletters, the Stockout, send one newsletter out once a week. Tends to be sort of later in the week. I think this week Walmart and Target reports. I'll probably dig into what they're saying, and I think that'll be interesting just because we've seen certain other companies talk about the consumer cutting back here more aggressively recently, like Starbucks, and we'll see if that's Walmart and Target, some of these retailers that are on a January fiscal year, so they'd be reporting in May rather than April, whether they're seeing the same things. So with that, I want to get into our first topic, sort of takeaways from last week's show with Britton Ladd. Had a really great interview last week. If you haven't seen it already, go to YouTube, the Stockout. There it is with Britton. And some of the takeaways for me is that headline there: India won't be the new China anytime soon. He sort of made the case that China has all this manufacturing in place, very difficult to replicate, even though India has a similar population. India really doesn't have the infrastructure in place on the transportation side. They haven't been doing this for as long. I mean, they have maybe the manpower, maybe they have the intellectual capital as well. But having all the transportation network built out is sort of a big hole there. So that was a big takeaway for me. And then, from Britton's perspective, he thought there were holes in the FTC's argument against Amazon, and didn't think that the FTC's lawsuit of Amazon, that's the one where Amazon is exploiting a monopoly to take advantage of consumers, that would hold up in court. So I thought that was interesting. And then he was really critical of Starbucks and thinks that Starbucks is doing a poor job of having a good customer experience, and thinks that they should have hired a different CEO. Or if you think Starbucks customer experience is bad, you haven't been to the Panera across the street from FreightWaves in Chattanooga. So Britain thinks their Starbucks food is awful, and anything I'm missing there.
Uh, no, I will say to go back. I was interested, especially in the India China conversation. He did also bring up Taiwan and maybe how much we, at least I think media glorifies them as something that China should be concerned with. Where he of course brought up India as something to be much more concerned with in terms of growth. I also on the Starbucks issue, right? It's interesting to see uh, if what type of pivot Starbucks could make. I was just stopped by one this weekend, and they do have even more. Now they have the lavender drinks and like something else in there too, and some new pineapple drinks and things of that nature. So when he was talking about kind of like making your own type of scenario, I think that's something I'm also seeing in more restaurants as well. It's like kind of this taking advantage of the actual consumer kind of choosing and making their own food or products. So I thought that was really interesting. I also, at the very end, he lightly brought up the economy as a whole, and almost more of like what the United States wants to be known for, as if it was its own business and what it's producing and what it's creating. And he brought up the fact that we're investing more into microchips being produced here. He really didn't like that. He thinks that was something that we will kind of regret over time, and maybe not as much of a great investment as we all hope it would be.
Mhm.
So I really like that thought because I agree with him there. Like, what exactly is going into maybe this next uh, couple of decades? What are we going to be known for? What are we producing? He thinks EVs is too much of a push for us as well. So it didn't offer up an idea for that, but maybe that's something we can touch on another episode. One other thing too on my notes here, and I think this goes into the microchip and a lot of what we're seeing being pushed back to the United, or maybe more so North America, as China, right, is also a huge investor within a lot of the movement back to North America for production. A lot of these facilities and factories in Mexico are still owned and invested in by China. So to say that we're eliminating them from our supply chain anytime soon, I think is silly. And I just thought it was very interesting how he brought up what China should be concerned with as well over time too. So yeah, go check out that episode. It did really well on our YouTube page as well. So make sure you like and subscribe so that we can continue to watch that data as well on our YouTube page and figure out what you guys all like hearing from our guests as well.
Yeah, that was a really good point. It was you try to get out of China by having stuff manufactured in Mexico, but if those Mexican companies are still owned by the Chinese,
Yeah,
then you're not really diversifying away from China or hurting their economy, no matter how much you might disagree with their human rights violations and all those things.
yeah.
But yeah, definitely check out that article or that video and the article I wrote up on it last week. But I want to move on to the next one. This one is just kind of I never miss an opportunity to make fun of a Panera, particularly the one across the street from FreightWaves in Chattanooga, which I'm really convinced is the worst quick service food I've ever been to, maybe with the exception of the Wendy's that used to be in downtown Chicago in the Loop. That was like the only thing open after a certain hours. But so Panera is pulling its killer lemonade. I think it's amazing it took this long. So the man bites dog story was this 21-year-old woman who was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, died in 2022, and her parents are suing for wrongful death. College students don't die from soft drinks very often. I guess she suffered a cardiac arrest. Apparently, it's tied to several other deaths, multiple lawsuits. Some others who didn't die would survive, saying that they have permanent heart issues. And there's a lot of caffeine in these drinks, anywhere from 155 milligrams to 302 milligrams of caffeine. So that's 2 or 3 cups of coffee. You don't know how many times people refill the cup. I guess if you're a member of the sip club, you can fill it up as many times as you want. But the thing that was weird to me is like people don't like OD on caffeine very often. Like, I mean, otherwise, Starbucks would have had the same problem, long time ago. It just seems like there must be something else in there that's harmful, that's maybe mixed with the caffeine. So that's the thing that's kind of mysterious to me. But I will say that the Panera across the street from FreightWaves in Chattanooga is so incompetent in making their food. I think their charged lemonade is decaf.
Well, the one thing I will say is I have had it. I, as someone who takes in a good amount of caffeine in a day, who's tried like Celsius, Red Bulls, all that stuff, I will say I think a big part of it, honestly, is like the sugar intake as well. There is one that is like sugar free and it tastes awful, as one would assume. Uh, but I always thought they were very sweet, and clearly, if half of it's lemonade, that makes sense why it's happening. I also kind of to revert back to the conversation with Britain. I kind of took that in and thought about it as well because as these events did happen for Panera, they actually started moving those beverages behind the counter. And if you've been to a Panera, well, even one hopefully that's moving a little bit better than the one in Chattanooga, uh, you'll notice that the actual consumer makes the drink, and they've been getting very good at using their app and using the storefront for um, uh, purchasers to come in and order their food right away. You grab the cup right there. There's like no need to interact with pretty much any human being until you're actually picking up your food. And it's part of the sip club. And one of my favorite things is I actually, if I just go in and get a drink, I actually don't have to interact with anyone whatsoever. So to consider like what that advantage is for the business, and to now have a drink that's like halting that process, right? And actually like taking everyone a couple steps behind, like that was really frustrating, like going in there and then if they would put the cup in a certain spot, but then it was like never there and ready on time. So it's like it became inconvenient almost to purchase them as a whole. And I honestly think that might be a little bit even more so why they're getting rid of it. You can still get as much caffeine. They have espresso, coffee, etc. So will I not become a sip club member? That is still out there. I will say they've got great teas. I was actually talking to them the other day about it at my local one that's a couple blocks away. Sounds like they're going to be having some really interesting like blueberry lemonades and some really interesting flavors. So we'll see how those end up. But I will say, kind of like listening to Britain and just considering like the loopholes around trying to even have that drink out anymore. It just, I can't. I think it slowed pretty much every store down to service just that simple drink that was clearly not giving them a good reputation to begin with.
Yeah, I'm amazed it wasn't pulled in 2022. Like, I'm just amazed it made
Yeah,
it to 2024. So I think that's the only thing surprising to me is that it made as long as it did. Um,
yeah,
but RIP, charge lemonade. Uh,
yeah, right. I wish you could
so
buy like a bottle of it and like keep it somewhere and like one day be like, oh, this thing, this good old thing. But unfortunately, we can't.
yeah, well, you were risky enough to try it. Yeah, I never did try it.
Yeah, I felt like it was the same as the coffee, to be honest with you. I didn't think it was. I do have a lot, so I think that my tolerance is up there. But I will say this: if I had any type of extreme heart disease, where it's like I shouldn't be having coffee to begin with, then like I definitely wouldn't have touched it at all.
Yeah, maybe they should have to. You should have to sign something before you drink it. Uh, so I want to move on to the next one. One thing that's not dying is malls, apparently, according to the Brookfield Properties CEO. So I thought this was an interesting article in Retail Dive. They do some pretty interesting stuff. So Brookfield is a real estate firm. They also invest in some of the anchor tenants like J.C. Penney and Kohl's. When I was in finance, I think there were multiple companies called Brookfields. I'd like to keep the Brookfields straight. There's also a company called Simon that's a similar company that invests in the mall, sort of retail space, and then also in some of the anchor tenants. And over the years, they've kept some of the anchor tenants alive, purchasing them out of bankruptcy. It's sort of helped the other side of the business, which is kind of an interesting strategy, sort of blending the relationship between tenant and landlord there. But this Brookfield CEO, they still seem pretty bullish on malls. They say that both Gen Z and the elderly like the malls. They say that any comments about the death of malls has been greatly exaggerated. That's sort of an accurate sort of blanket, statement. Some places are doing better than others, but in general, malls are still they're still going to be around. They say some of these spaces need to evolve and be redeveloped, and they can be redeveloped into other things. And they talk about how some people like some of these apartment buildings that are close to malls for the convenience. And they say even the online stores, like these, there's not really going to be a lot of sort of online only stores anymore. That even some of these ones that started out online, we talked about Wayfair the other day, those have gotten to be more sort of mixed in person stores as well. Warby Parker is another one that was, you think of that as being an online retailer. My local mall here has a Warby Parker physical presence. But what about the malls in Michigan? Are those thriving?
Uh, Definitely wouldn't say thriving. I would say the word changing is definitely a big point. I've noticed in my local malls, which have been barely keeping themselves alive, a lot of the businesses in them now are like small uh businesses that are maybe like t-shirt makers. There's a really cool store that like so talk about Gen Z's, like has like really cool retro jerseys and different types of shoes to buy and trade as well. So I've noticed that the tenant of these malls has changed into more, I'd say, smaller companies, which has kept them alive so far. It's interesting though, especially around the Detroit area. There's going to be a lot of, I think, changing in regards to, and they mentioned this in the article too, almost more of like creating like this outdoor experience in like city center as a whole. If we can bring up a Google Map image really quick. There's a really big mall called Lakeside Mall in Detroit that they're looking to redevelop. It's pretty large. I've been there numerous times. If we can bring up though this other picture of it being redeveloped, the map of it. This is what they're hoping to make it look like. So all of that parking space will change. They're looking to add about 2,800 apartment, uh, not buildings, but rooms, facilities, and change it into more of this outdoor space. If we can bring up that photo, so it's more of like a gathering center than just an average basic mall. And I think when we talk about Gen Z and what they're looking for, something like this is huge, especially for I'd say in Detroit too, where we get only what like 6 months out of the year we can enjoy the outdoors. This is going to be a really cool layout. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of again small businesses taking up some of these spots. A lot of really cool restaurants and have been coming researching in Detroit area as well, as the city is kind of starting to invest in itself some more. So I'm excited about that. We're seeing it at MSU's campus too. There's a ton of really tall buildings on top of what are like Targets and some of these more like mall-like tenants too. So I think again, it's less about will the mall be there and more about the experience that you're creating within that structure or that real estate as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things you think about when you think about sort of historical malls, you think about like Macy's and JC Penney and those, like a lot of
Yeah.
those companies have really struggled, but like there's still a place for it, I think, in sort of the consumer experience. Just they have a lot of things in one place. I know the one here that I'm familiar with in Dallas, which I don't think at all is the typical mall, is this North Park Mall, and it's very healthy. Like there's lots of people there. It's actually one of the things that people list as destinations of places to visit in Dallas because there's lots of art and sculptures in the mall, which gets people
Yeah.
in, I think. But it has kind of every kind of high end store you can think of. And that just might just reflect demographics of Dallas, always busy spending money or making money is kind of the ethos of Dallas. But it does seem like, from at least from my perspective, yeah, I mean, the death of a mall was greatly exaggerated. I'm going to move on to the next one. Amazon. Always talk a lot about Amazon here. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, wrote it up for the Stockout newsletter, as Amazon imposed fees on marketplace sellers. Now, we already know from the FTC report that it's a difficult time being a marketplace seller on Amazon. You have to abide by all their rules in order to get qualify for the Amazon Prime. But these latest fees were imposed on not having enough inventory. And so basically, there needs to be 28 days of inventory relative to historic sales. And that would just allow Amazon to fulfill those orders quickly and deliver the type of customer experience that it's targeting. And Amazon, to a certain extent, backed off some of these fees, maybe more adjustments than backed off of them. They sort of, and these fees would range from anywhere from sort of 32 cents an item to $1.10 an item, and that sort of depends on, well, how expensive is the item, something very expensive, that's not going to make much difference. If it's a consumer packaged good item, which might just be a few dollars, that could really be the difference. And that was sort of the angle I took for the stock out, is if there's fees for not having enough inventory, then it's going to make having CPG through Amazon, which Amazon punches below its weight class on CPG, that's going to make it more difficult. But it is scaling back some of these, and there's exceptions for variety. So if there can be a certain item, if it's not the right flavor, that still would count as having an inventory. But what they've done is they've scaled back to if for very low volume items, sort of recognizing that maybe it's difficult to predict what 28 days of sales is if it's a very low volume item. So they've scaled that back to 7 days, or they've scaled it back for the low volume items because those are just lower less predictable. So instead of 28 days, you only need to have 7 days of inventory if something doesn't move as quickly. And then there's exceptions for the lightning and best deals during Prime days. Those are difficult to predict, which you can burn through a lot of inventory. And then if there's anything that's related to Amazon's processing or intaking the items, there's exceptions for that too. And then Amazon had this quote that they hope the sellers, can avoid this fee entirely. And I have to sort of agree with them. I mean, the impression that I got is these are just to kind of make it so Amazon can deliver that same day, next day service. It doesn't seem to me like they're trying to make this a profit center, but I want to see if you had any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree, especially when you talk about like the CPG aspect of things. I wonder if a big part of this too is like for those that maybe have like this scheduled fulfillment, right? Like they have maybe toilet paper deliver every 2 weeks or every month to their house, those type of items. If they're having trouble with that inventory, so this is kind of a push to make sure, like, hey, if we have this offering, we need to be sure we're there, sticking to it for our customers as well. Especially when you talked about too, like bringing it down to 7 days. Uh, I would hope that you're considering that type of schedule with what your consumers are purchasing off of Amazon. I mean, it's part of you does want to consider, okay, well, are they kind of like bullying them into paying these fees? But the other aspect is I feel like they're also motivating them to make sure that they're sticking to or that they're creating a fulfillment process that was going to be able to work for the customers buying those items, right? So it's not so much, I think that's something positive for Amazon, but it's also seems like this is also hopefully motivates those to be thoughtful of the experience for those consumers looking to buy those products on on Amazon's site too.
Yeah, and there was another interesting thing, sort of unrelated to that, but also related to Amazon, is they're changing the requirements for certification for nutritional supplements. And I pulled this from the Cartograph newsletter. Cartograph's a company that we've had on the show before. They're a consulting firm for the companies that sell into the Amazon marketplace. And so what they did is that Amazon, for nutritional supplements, so things like sexual enhancement, weight management, and sports nutrition and bodybuilding, those companies have to send supplements to pre-approved testing facilities for inspection and certification. So Amazon no longer trusts brands to select their own testing facilities. They have to go through ones that are pre-approved by Amazon. And sort of as a reminder, I mean, 60% of Amazon sales is not from Amazon itself. It's from these marketplace sellers. It might appear that's from Amazon, but really it's from these marketplace sellers. And there's this big question out there, I think, of product safety, where is Amazon responsible for product safety if it came from a marketplace seller? And the question of, is Amazon a distributor or not? So clearly, I think Amazon is making moves. And I think this is going to impact other categories as well, food categories, other categories in CPG. There's going to be stricter requirements for testing products, and Amazon's not going to trust the sellers to do their own testing or select those companies to do which companies. It's going to be those that are approved by by Amazon. So ultimately, that should lead to safer products. I would think.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think again, as someone who's used Amazon, the one thing I would probably avoid is getting into maybe some of those areas where I'd hope that it is being tested directly in a way, or at least safeguarded for the consumer as well. I mean, when it comes to supplements and things like that, a third party seller does make me kind of nervous in that regard. So. At least it adds, I think, a little bit more of that reassurance to the consumer as well. Nice. Well, I think, hey, time flies. I didn't even realize where we were. Thank you, everyone, for checking out the show. Make sure you go check out last week's episode on YouTube as well. Head to freightwaves.com, click on newsletters at the top of the page. The Stockout's right there at the top in the middle. You can't miss it. Make sure you join our community so you get our weekly newsletters too. And you'll get a discount code to our June live event in Atlanta, the Future of Supply Chain, which we'll be doing a live show there too. So you can go check that out. Hopefully, we'll see you all in Atlanta soon. Until then, we'll see you next week.